Hello, this is D.A. Ward. Video diary, the 6th of April, 2021. Continuing with the saga of the late William R. Rathbun. I'm not sure R. Anyway, William Rathbun. Longtime friend who just passed away. So the last time I talked about Bill, I think I was talking about after the creation of Get the Buzz On and the destruction of the people and Sun, Moon, and Stars. The family, extended family of Bob Rathbun, his brother and his wife and 3 kids and Bill, kind of evolved and broke up. It didn't break up, but Bill decided to, they were living in this mansion, Victorian mansion in Point Arenas. Renting it for $75 a month from the absentee investor in the winter, when it was cold and foggy and not tourist season at all. And then Bill, I think, decided Bill was really into the marketing and sales of these books, and he decided to take his Volkswagen bus, which he purchased for I don't know, the ungodly sum of $600 or something. It was a mint 1966, I think, or 67 Type 2 Volkswagen bus, now worth well over $10,000. Not a microbus, which he also had later, which is like fabulously valuable, with the little porthole windows along the top. But he had this great Volkswagen bus, and he was anxious to travel, and I guess he must have spent some of his Burroughs savings or something on that, after living with almost nothing and traveling and camping on people's rugs and living rooms, and then with the extended group working on the books at Point Arenas and camping, before they got there, camping up the coast of Marin County, and probably they spent some time in Bolinas, where his brother and brother's family had lots of friends. Then they probably went north from there and found that rental. So he took a cross-country trip back and to stay with relatives in, I don't know, Maryland or somewhere close to the eastern seaboard. Uncles and aunts and things, cousins once removed. he took like 20 boxes of Get the Buzz On and Sun, Moon, and Stars and Instruction to the People, I think on this trip, and stashed them at the relative's house that was closest to the major markets in New York City and Washington, D.C. The Connecticut towns. I think the relatives were in Connecticut, actually. And proceeded to go to all these small bookstores in the major urban centers with a invoice book, trying to sell, 10 copies here, 5 copies there, which worked really well. At that level, it paid his gas and allowed him to have some spending money. Impressed his relatives. And then, when that period was over, it probably got to be, this is probably in the spring, and when it got cold, he said goodbye bye to his latest host and drove the van back toward the Pacific coast. But it broke down conveniently really close to Denver, Colorado, where he had lived with his first girlfriend, and where he had all his friends. And so he ended up staying at whatever his friend was that had the large brick house in Denver, the old areas of Denver, and with all of its strange inhabitants, was being rented out to Rocky and his girlfriend, who was an apprentice and a real hot local singer on the Denver scene, and his wife was also a great folk singer in her own right. Forgotten her name, but on one of my trips back east as a hitchhiker, I stayed with her in their house in Indiana, I think. I stayed a few nights, and they took me around to the local clubs, and we had a great time. I think Rocky was out on tour. She was manning the fort there with a hirsute group of stone people. Anyway, those are some of the people at the house, and I started to mention other people. I think at the last taping or digital recording of this series. Anyway, he ended up falling in love with Robin. This girl, and my memory is, the real problem with my memory, it turns out, by research, is that memory is not a place where you store the absolute facts of everything that happened to you, and then if you happen to have the foresight to remember where in the brain cells you put these absolute visions of what happened, you can always go and retrieve them, maybe with some chemical stimulus or a little brain probe or something. That was the old idea of the brain. Turns out the brain is constantly, that all the neurons that supposedly were inactive and stored all these old memories were constantly refreshing themselves and getting different versions of what happened as the worldview of the person whose brain they belong to created a logical set of connections about the world, about other things in the world. And so that memories are really not, they have to be refreshed all the time. And the parts that aren't useful get discarded. And the neurons may find that a part that got discarded was useful again, and they may have recreated it in some other context. And so your brain is always recreating the past, creating and recreating, depending upon how you view the world at the present time. And that people's memories can be manipulated dramatically by time and by references to other people who tell stories in which they incorporate into their narrative, of themselves, which we incorporate into the narrative of ourselves, every one of us. And so there's gaps in this memory of what happened, because I said earlier that Robin and Bill were down in southern Mexico, where Robin stayed with a group of people that were hanging out with this shaman woman in the mushroom fields around Mitla. But I think this was a second trip to Mexico after, the only way I can figure it is it was a second trip to Mexico that occurred after Bill had met Robin. At least that's the latest reconstruction that I can give you of from my own brain's uncertain supply of memories. So I think Bill fell in love with Robin, or either that, or he reunited with her. She had a room at Rendell's house. She rented a room there, and the two of them hooked up again, and or for the first time, I'm not sure. And Bill unloaded, boxes of the boxes of books that were left from after his selling trip to the East Coast, because the bus had blown up. Not sure if it had sucked a valve or something dramatic had happened to it on the outskirts of Denver on the way back. So he stayed there a while, and then I believe he came back to Berkeley, where he rented a room in a communal house on very big boulevard that winds in from Oakland and then kind of splits and goes into Upper Berkeley above Telegraph Avenue and into the campus. I'm trying to think of the name of that street. And we, Messiah and I, also lived on that same street in a room in a group house. And as near as I can recall, Bill recruited me. Oh, he rented the room and then recruited me. And so I was introduced to all the people in the house that he lived in, which were manifold, wonderful people. And I'll try to explain, I'll try to recreate the atmosphere of this place because it was great. Maybe I can do it in detail, I don't know. But anyway, it's indicative of the lifestyle of counterculture newbies. I mean, in a sense, we were counterculture veterans, but we were young and impressionable and thought that our world was sufficient, you know. And we created a wonderful, marvelous day-to-day routine that started out with smoking pot in the morning in somebody's bedroom, somebody's room, like Gary Scupa's room, which was near the top of that particular house, looking out over the street. And he had a girlfriend named Zoe, and the two of them would be lolling around in bed, you know, at 10 o'clock in the morning. And we would go up there and get stoned and plan our adventurous day's activities, which often included me going to the Safeway store on University Avenue, about halfway down University Avenue from between the campus and the Bayshore Freeway, Safeway Market, where in that spring or summer the trash bins in back of the market, which were unlocked, were full of the most exquisite produce and fruit that had, you know, cherries and nectarines and peaches and grapes, things that at the peak of ripeness were ripped off of the displays because there might be one bruise or a softness, a spot of softness that marred the gleaming display inside the store, and so they were thrown away just as they got really, really perfect, you know. So my regular routine was to go back there and dumpster dive and grab all this delicious fruit and vegetables, beets and broccoli and tons and tons of yogurt, these small individual 8-ounce plastic sealed things of yogurt that had just expired. And of course, yogurt is, you know, it's a product of the working of a bacteria that breaks down milk products. So it's meant to be. It's meant to ferment, I guess you'd say, in other words. And those yogurts were just absolutely delicious also. So I'd come back, and I got so much stuff that I would make I had a regular route. At this point in Berkeley, I'd started working on Volkswagen buses and restoring them to make some money. I was living on unemployment and didn't have my regular job that I had had before at the hospital in Pinole. And so I always had a Volkswagen bus to drive around, so I'd throw that stuff into the current bus, many of which I got by walking the streets of Berkeley stoned and finding these things gathering dust on the sides of the streets because they'd blown something in the engine, which I could fix. And people were glad. I would knock on the nearest doors to find who it belonged to, and I oftentimes ended up with a Volkswagen bus for, $50 or $35 or, it's like they weren't worth anything in those days. I had 2 buses. And there was a great junkyard. Oh yeah, just in next town up along the bay. The junkyard section of Berkeley, or the next town. I don't remember the name of the next town, but in the area, and it just was full of Volkswagen buses, just choked with them. And you could go there, and it was owned by these black guys, and they were constantly using forklifts to reorganize their stock of derelict cars, and you would go in there and get in a Volkswagen bus, maybe number 3 on a pile of 4 or something, and pry parts out of it, at all angles, and while the things was teetering back and forth. And the guy with the forklift was trying to maneuver around you, if he knew you were there. It was like back down in the American culture, this was the era of using junk cars for entertainment purposes. They had destruction derbies all over, where you took a junk car from a junkyard and got it running and took it out on a track and rammed everybody else, and the last car that could go forward and reverse is the one that won a prize, won the money, whatever the prize was. But it was, it was a rather cavalier way of recycling automobiles. So Bill came by and persuaded me to hitchhike with him back to Denver. The reason I can talk about the house in Denver is that I spent some time there, about a month there actually, or 3 weeks or something, because Bill persuaded me to hitchhike with him back to where the bus was parked, in the back of Rendell's or Dewar's mansion, or brick 3-story house, and it was in a little slot in the back there, and he persuaded me to go back there so that we could rebuild it. Could rebuild it. The truth was, he wanted me to rebuild it. And I did. I was fascinated with Volkswagens. It was just like, if I got stoned in the morning, the thing that I really wanted to do was something that was fascinating, and I was fascinated with mechanics and the way things got put together and taken apart. And Scott, one of the roommates, one of the people renting a room in the house that Bill had rented a room in was also like that. And for years and years, I'd come through Berkeley, and Bill, would always have Scott up here. Scott was a regular at Bill's house to sit around and shoot the breeze, smoke a joint. And Scott and I would get in these enormously complicated, fanatical arguments about which part fit into where and where it was and what its failings are. We got interested, fanatically interested in the mechanical processes of the Volkswagen Type 2 bus and the Volkswagen Beetles, like that, and Carmen Diaz and all the Volkswagen stuff. Such that when Bob and Ann, who were still living up in Mendocino County above San Francisco, not in Point Arenas anymore, but they found several places up there. When Ann needed a car, she detailed me and to find her a car. So Scott and I got stoned and looked at the local, rag. I'm not sure what the name of the local newspaper was that everybody advertised in and had to sell a car or a couch or an appliance. But anyway, there was one of these little newspaper format things, and we found what we thought was the perfect car for her. It was a Volkswagen van in San Francisco that belonged to a plumber, and it was mint. It was a 1957, and it wasn't a bus. It was the van, and the upholstery, everything was immaculate. The guy had taken really good care of it since it was new, and so we went out and bought that for her, and here she was living on in an area which was nothing but curves and upgrades and down slopes on a 2-lane highways in the fog, and she had a Volkswagen van with very little headlight power and a 4-speed stick shift, which had, and so the engine had to be wound way high to go up a hill, and you had to be a really, really expert driver. And we just assumed she just would be fascinated and delighted by our pick for a car for her, because it was so great and so untouched and reliable is probably the byword we tried to give it to her. And it was reliable. It did last until she finally got so sick that we had to sell it for her again. But so we were all interacting. The same group that made the 3 books. We're all in the same geographical proximity, meaning in a 100-mile radius, I guess you'd say, of each other. So let me talk about, so here we are in Denver trying to rebuild the bus. Let me finish that story. So Bill and Robin were reproducing the Berkeley ethos, which is to get up, stay up till 2 in the morning, smoking and talking and playing music and convincing, stoned convincing. Get up about 10 or 9:30 or 10 in the morning when the sunlight was just at its perfect spring morning moment, and smoke a joint and talk about what you were going to do during the day, but not do it. Just sit around and explain elaborately what you're thinking of doing for that day until the next, brilliant idea was advanced. Then you would talk endlessly about that brilliant idea and what you were going to do with that brilliant idea. And pretty soon it was noon, 1 o'clock. You'd have breakfast in bed. Somebody would go down to the refrigerator and do something and come back with food. That was the atmosphere there, and I spent a couple of days doing that. And then I decided my best strategy was to work on the car while he did that, and have him come out whenever I needed a hand. And I did. I rebuilt his engine, his car's engine, his bus's engine, out behind Dewar's house. And let's see, I'm not sure how that happened. I think I got it running, and then I hitched back to Berkeley, and he drove the van with the books, the remaining books, back a little later after he. But this could be a really complicated scenario, because somewhere in there, he and Robin had to go down to Mitla and Oaxaca and meet Bob and Ann, who were down there. But that would be probably while they were making the book. So if this was after the book was published and was being marketed, the books, my mind is like the time factor of memories that are broken into units like stories. You don't remember what you were doing. You just remember the story. You don't remember what time that was and what was going on when you woke up in the morning and on the news, and you don't remember that stuff. It's all stuff your brain threw away. It was useless, and it needed the processing power for the next big events that were bound to occur. So anyway, I think I hitched back to Berkeley, and then somewhere at that time, Messiah and I left Berkeley in one of the Volkswagen buses that I'd rebuilt and paneled with wood from orange crates. Paneled inside, and created a double bed, and we went down to Mexico to meet Bob and Ann, who were down there again that year, and the kids, and we found them in First we went down to Oaxaca, where I think we thought they were to be the last letter they had written or something, and we didn't find them there, so we ended up camping in this at this maybe cove north of Cordovan Hill along the coast. And that particular camp was a camp that they'd been camping at, so everybody knew them. So it was that kind of scene, you know. And so everybody became naturally familiar with everyone else because you're stoned all the time and talking a blue streak and going on adventures together. Like at that point, everybody was fishing on this point of land with these little hand lines you could buy for you know, a few pesos. Fishing, monofilament fishing line on a spool, you know, wound like a kite string spool or something, and you throw a bobbin on it and hang some hooks from it with bits of some sort of limpet or something that you got off the rocks. You go out to this point of volcanic earth that projected way out into the ocean and gingerly walk down the slope toward the ocean where the waves were crashing onto it, and you throw your line in the water and let it drift out, you know, and let the waves take it out, and often you'd pull in a fish. So that was one of the adventures we would be involved in and create expeditions to do. And so we were out there on the rock one time, all fishing and stoned and gossiping, and you know, with our swimming trunks on and stuff that we brought, our wallets and pants and lunches or whatever it is we packed for the trip. It's like so the idea, the habit was you could dive off the rock into the wave, into the, you know, between waves, and you could swim around and get cool. It was tropically, you know, hot on those black pumice cliffs above the ocean. And then you could swim around to the side, swim around the point of land, and get back up on the land and walk back to where you'd started from. So that's what everybody was used to doing. So you'd leave your pants and all the stuff you brought in piles on this rock while you were doing your fishing and swimming. And we were all out there, and somebody, it was in between, you know, people were fishing, and there were maybe 20 of us out on that rock. And somebody said, "Watch out," or "Look out," or something, and I turned around, and a wave about I mean, I was, you know, probably 10 feet above the water, and a wave 6 feet or so above my head where I was perched was coming at us. and some people that were right on the edge dived into the curl of the wave as it hit the cliff, and people like myself further up the rock just hung on for dear life, you know, grabbed a knob of pumice and held on, and I couldn't hold on. I was actually my grip on the rock was I was pulled out to sea, scratching my chest and arms as the wave withdrew. But we were so used to being out in the water looking up at the cliffs that it wasn't a life-threatening position to be in. We could just swim around the rock and do the same thing we did, except everybody was cut and scratched up, and everybody had lost whatever it was that they left on the rocks further up. So people lost their wallets. I don't know what we lost, but Masai was back in camps, luckily, because she was not a swimmer. Probably the reason she was back in camp was that. So Bob and Ann had been there, and so then we went further north and we actually found them. I think it was Zipolite or something. So that name comes back to haunt me. They were there in that camp, and I found them on the beach at dusk. The kids were out playing on the beach with other kids from the groups that were camped there, and I just joined the game. And then they realized the newer player was somebody they knew. The kids did, anyway. And so then, yet another time, I'm sure that was the time, we drove back in the bus. There were a lot of other adventures I can talk about, but that has nothing to do with Bill, because he wasn't there at that time. Let me continue with the memorial to William Rathbun next time. This is D.A. Ward, the 6th of April, 2021, signing off.